Well, as unfortunate as it is to say, it looks like things didn't end so amazing for this film series. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel and another installment in my Spider-Man review series, where I review every single Spider-Man movie in the lead up to No Way Home. And today we're talking about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it. And make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's jump right into it and let's talk about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This once again stars Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. When New York is put under siege by Oscorp, it's up to Spider-Man to save the city he swore to protect, as well as his loved ones. So before we begin, as I've been doing with each of these reviews, this will get into spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2 yet and you wish to know absolutely nothing, this is your spoiler warning. Go watch the movie, then come back to this. But anyway, here we go. Mark Webb returns to direct this one, with it being the direct sequel to 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man. And like what any good sequel is supposed to do, this expanded upon this character's world, and it looked to go bigger than its predecessor did. And the intention was that this would be a launching pad for an entire universe that included more sequels and a Sinister Six spin-off. Considering this was after the release of The Avengers, and it was shown that the idea of an expanded universe with all these interconnected movies could work, which was before unheard of, Sony wanted in on doing something similar for Spider-Man, who on his own has such a wide array of intriguing side characters and villains that they could be just as interesting in their own projects. But unfortunately, that didn't work out as well as they planned, with this receiving mixed reviews, as well as currently being the only Spider-Man movie to be rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. Plus, while it did gross in terms of box office numbers, it was still a franchise low for the character, who's arguably to this day still Marvel's most popular character of all time. And this led to Sony to scrap any future installments and instead work out their deal with Marvel that we currently have with Spider-Man now in the MCU, making this the final installment in this particular film series. Which is kind of a shame, considering I actually don't think it's that bad. And in hindsight, upon the most recent rewatch, I'm gonna say something that I never thought I'd find myself saying, but I actually think I like this just a bit more than the first Amazing Spider-Man. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the first Amazing Spider-Man. It's a well-made movie, and it's entertaining. But as I said in my review of that film, it does suffer a bit due to its having to retread a lot of the same territory as the first Raimi film, while also attempting to do something different. While it does stand well on its own, it does bring about a sense of familiarity, the way any other non-franchise movie might feel when rehashing certain genre tropes, even if they're technically original stories. But here, with Spider-Man's origins out of the way, it allowed this film to take more liberties and do as it wanted, as now it could pull from any other storyline that it wanted to, rather than just rehash plot points from anything else Raimi did. And while the execution isn't perfect, I think the film's flaws aren't as distracting as many people made them out to be, as I found this to find a better sweet spot in terms of mixing its entertaining elements as well as its darker plot points. And we'll start once again with Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, who, like the first movie, are this film's heart and soul, with their chemistry being one of the big things that make this work so well. Now, the only general element this does carry over from the second Raimi film is Peter struggling to balance his personal life with his commitment as Spider-Man, which at its core is a big part of what makes Spider-Man as compelling as he is. But this time around, we get to see it explored in a different way, with a lot of the tension stemming from Peter promising Captain Stacy in the last film before he died that he would keep Gwen at a distance so that she stays out of danger. And because he decides to keep his promise to Captain Stacy, Gwen breaks up with him early on, and for much of the film, Peter tries to make amends with her and make sure she's still safe. Now, while this was a plot point that I initially thought came off as a tad repetitive and more like a teen drama on the CW the first time around, and to a bit of an extent some of these scenes still are, but I've actually grown to have a lot more of an appreciation for these scenes this time around. Because once again, as I said, these moments stay true to the essence of who Spider-Man is, someone who accepts a major responsibility to protect others as this superhero, but also coming at the price of his relationships and his personal life. And despite his initial attempts at trying to make both work, he cares too much about Gwen to let her be in danger. And while at first this does harken back to plot points from Spider-Man 2, the key difference is that Gwen is an entirely different character from Mary Jane, and her reaction to Peter keeping his distance is drastically different. Even though Mary Jane in Spider-Man 2 moved on from Peter, she still tried hard to maintain a friendship and still found herself trying to make something work out with him, despite the amount of times he disappoints her. Here, Gwen is willing to move so she can get completely away from Peter, as we see that she may move to England on a scholarship for college. In this case, she gets hurt once by Peter, and she's not willing to let him do it again. Even though she eventually comes around after some convincing, she initially wasn't interested in some sort of middle ground approach with him. She ends things and is almost out altogether, and it leads to a completely different dynamic that allows this to not just feel like a copy and paste of Spider-Man 2. Now, while this does lead to maybe one too many repetitive disagreement scenes towards the middle of the movie, adding to a somewhat bloated 2.5-hour runtime, I still think these scenes were done exceptionally well. The film finds a nice balance with grounded character drama that also feels compelling and 100% earned. Now, I think part of it is due to the excellent chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, and the way they try bringing out some of the better aspects of what make Peter and Gwen work so well together. They attempt to lighten the mood and joke around with one another, and focus on the things that they like most about each other. And they'll take the moment seriously, but as the film goes on, they try rekindling the spark between them and try highlighting why they mean so much to each other. And it allows them to make these moments something emotional, but nothing that wallows too much in one-note self-pity and bickering. They give us a reason to want to follow them on their respective journeys. And again, it goes back to something I've been saying since my review of the first Raimi film. You need Peter to be just as interesting without the suit as he is with it. And in these moments, I think that was accomplished. And that's what really made me warm up to this film considerably more this time around. Now, speaking of Spider-Man in the suit, that brings us to the storylines involving Spider-Man versus our two main villains. The Harry Osborn version of the Green Goblin, played by Dane DeHaan, and Electro, played by Jamie Foxx. Now, I know this part of the movie is where people mostly have issues with the film, and understandably so, but I don't think they're terrible. Sure, their designs are a little silly, and they do move away somewhat from these ultra-grounded takes on these characters, but once you get past the designs, I think they're actually kind of alright, as is a very funny Paul Giamatti who cameos at the beginning and end of the film as Rhino. Now, does Jamie Foxx get to exhibit the most range here, considering he's this dweeby guy in the vein of Uma Thurman's Poison Ivy from Batman and Robin, who stumbles over himself for the first half of the movie? Not exactly. But the man tries here, and he commits all the way, and because of that, I wouldn't call his performance bad. It's actually watchable, even if it doesn't get the most to do in terms of range. Plus, I didn't mind this arc about a guy who wants to be seen that feels like he's been wronged one too many times. Like, I thought the moment where Electro first bursts onto the scene post-transformation and Spider-Man recognizes him and attempts to calm him down, only for Electro to be shot at, was a very well done sequence, as it was both solid as an action scene, and it played nicely into the emotional side of things for this villain. Again, it goes back to another thing I've said earlier about how great Spider-Man's rogues gallery is. They don't start off as sadistic sociopaths who do evil things for the sake of being evil. They're meant to be sympathetic, and because Foxx tries incredibly hard here and does manage to inject some semblance of pathos in this performance, I didn't necessarily mind this. Like I said, it's nothing we haven't seen before, and it doesn't completely play to his strengths, but I think he made it work enough, even if he had to go through half the movie in a ridiculous blue design. Plus, when it comes to the fight scenes with him, I found them to be entertaining. The effects don't look hokey, and they were choreographed well enough to feel exciting and allowed for scenes to feel like they had actual stakes. So despite some grievances with the look and familiarity of the arc, I was still entertained and was able to take those moments seriously enough while still having fun with them. And as for DeHaan, while I wasn't exactly keen on the franchise going back to the Osborns when they were the main focus of the Raimi films, I do appreciate that they try going down a different route with this character. The only thing that I wasn't the biggest fan of is that he is introduced pretty late in the movie, and it does disrupt the pacing a bit. I mean, I know Norman Osborn, played here in a cameo by Chris Cooper, was mentioned in the first movie, with Oscorp being heavily linked to that film's events, but we never saw him or Harry till this movie, and we never really got any backstory on them until now. So it is a little jarring when you already have a number of stories going on, and you then have to stop the movie halfway through to then jump into establishing the Osborns and their relationship with Peter that we never even heard of until now. It's another thing that contributes to that pretty bloated runtime. But honestly, once we get through all this groundwork to cover, and we see him teaming up with Electro, I thought it wasn't bad at all, especially as it allows DeHaan to really chew up the scenery. With this take on the Goblin, especially taking on more of a goblin-like form instead of just being a guy in a suit, it does give DeHaan the opportunity to play around with the role, even if it's not to the heights as a much more famous take on the character. Plus, I thought he played off Foxx well, and despite some flaws in the writing for the film as a whole, they made a good team. And on the opposite end, I did like how initially Peter tried connecting with Harry due to them both suffering the loss of their parents, continuing a story element from the first film where Peter's missing parents were always in the back of his mind as all this goes on. It was a nice attempt at giving these characters a lot more emotional depth. So really, I didn't have a problem with the amount of villains we got here, or the storylines we explored. I just think the film needed to find a better way to establish what it needed to establish earlier so that there was more of a balance, and each plotline felt like a domineering force from the get-go. That way, there'd be a nice balance. Though I will say, I do think this did a considerably better job at balancing out all of its storylines than Spider-Man 3. Just saying. And then there's the ending, which is adapted from the famous storyline, The Night Gwen Stacy Died, where exactly that happens. Gwen falls from a tower and Peter uses his web to catch her, but he's too late and she dies when she hits the ground, making this one of the darkest endings of any Spider-Man film. It's pretty gut-wrenching with some phenomenal acting by Andrew Garfield. And as much as it sucks that such a great character was killed off, it once again goes back to the themes I've been talking about this entire review series. Spider-Man is relatable because he's a very flawed protagonist, as likable as he is. Even with the suit on, he still makes mistakes, and he learns from them. And we see that these last few moments were used as a source of inspiration for Spider-Man to do better as a result of her death. It's him really trying to take in what just happened. Though despite the attempt at an uplifting spin towards the end, it is a shame that this darker ending is where things end for this character within this series. It would have been great to see where things headed for him as he continued developing into the more confident Spider-Man that we know and love, especially as he gets to face off against the Sinister Six, who they were also setting up in these last few minutes. But unfortunately, as I said, the lower box office numbers and mixed critical reception put an end to all that, though Sony's still making an attempt to get a Sinister Six team made up with this new universe that began with Venom in 2018. And while it's cool they're still trying to make that happen, even though at this point I'd rather it just be in the MCU, it's a shame we didn't get more time with this version of Spider-Man in his own series, especially as I think this was a very misunderstood film, and it was setting up the series to really come into its own. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 isn't the best Spider-Man movie out there, but I actually do think it's a bit better than the first Amazing Spider-Man film, now that it was free to not completely rehash some of the same beats we've previously seen in the Raimi films. While its runtime is a bit bloated, and it doesn't do the absolute best job of smoothly balancing out all of its storylines, I do think each subplot was done well enough, and once it gets through some awkward bumps in the road, it's actually pretty solid for the most part. It's another mix of grounded character drama with compelling action, and it contains two great performances from Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, who are the true heart and soul of this movie, and who I wish we got to spend more time with. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 gets a 7.5 out of 10. Probably the most unfairly criticized of all these movies by a long shot, and one that got better for me on this most recent rewatch. While I'm glad we now have a Spider-Man in the MCU, it is a shame this didn't do as well as it did, and it gained the reputation that it did. Because Andrew Garfield is a solid Spider-Man, and I think he's going to go down as the most underappreciated because of the reputation these movies had. But what are you gonna do? Anyway, moving right along, speaking of the MCU, I won't be covering Spider-Man's appearances in team-up films like Civil War or Infinity War and Endgame, but stay tuned, as up next will be my review of the first MCU solo Spider-Man film, Spider-Man Homecoming. And in the meantime, let me know, did you see The Amazing Spider-Man 2, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Do you really think this is the worst Spider-Man movie, or do you think it's a bit unfairly criticized? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoy this video, please like it, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.